Welcome to Lawline with your host, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman is a distinguished trial attorney, author, and lecturer. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law today. And now we introduce our guest and our host, Alan Schnorman.
Welcome to Lawline. Statistically, rape is the least reported but fastest growing crime in the United States, with only 1 in 10 women who are sexually assaulted notifying the police. Today we'll look at the special unit in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office that was created to exclusively investigate and prosecute forcible rape, sodomy, and sexual abuse cases. Our guests are Linda Fairstein, Chief of the Sex Crimes Prosecution Unit and Deputy Chief of the Trial Division at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and Louise Kinley, a counselor at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Rape Intervention Unit. Hello, Linda. Hello, Louise.
Hello.
Hi.
Louise, why don't you tell us a little about your unit?
We see all victims of violent crime at our unit. The majority of our clients are rape survivors or battered women, but we see anyone, attempted homicide, mugging victims, anyone who is having difficulty recovering from the kind of trauma that people experience when they're attacked in this way.
I assume you've seen them before Linda sees them.
It can go both ways. Very often, Linda's office will call us and refer someone that they feel needs some help, because it's a very grueling process to go through prosecution.
Linda, what about your unit? Tell us a little about it.
Our unit was the first of its kind in the country. It was set up in 1974 for, as you said in your introduction, to investigate and prosecute forcible sex offense cases. It was designed to address 2 specific problems that existed in this field, primarily that there were so few convictions in these cases when they reached a courtroom, and secondly, and just as important, that victims were rarely made to be comfortable during the process of the investigation and trial. And so we have tried to address both by training prosecutors to deal with the problems that are unique to these cases, and by learning what the problems are and how we can overcome them in a courtroom.
Louise, if a woman is a victim of one of these sexual crimes, why should she report it?
Well, I think the most important thing is that it's a way of empowering the woman. Control has been taken away from her, and she can regain control by taking it to the courts and by prosecuting the man who attacked her. And this can have a very powerful and positive impact on a person's life. At the same time, it in itself is very difficult. It's a long process. How long is the average case?
3 to 6 months, we like to say, is the average. And unfortunately, as Louise has seen in cases that overlap, the process can be longer than that if there are delays and if a defense attorney doesn't want to take the case to trial.
Linda, some victims feel that they themselves will be put on trial.
That's traditionally been the problem associated with this process, and the pleasure of doing a show like this is hoping to reach people and tell them that there have been a lot of changes. There have been legislative changes in the 70s and early 80s that have made these cases easier to prosecute. And when I say easier, not just for my team, but for the victims going through the process. There are units like Louise's that exist that are just wonderful, that make the difference in a survivor's ability to get on with her life and deal with the problem, which doesn't happen if she doesn't report it.
Linda, when the victim takes the stand, can the defense counsel bring up their past sexual activity?
In very few cases, and that was changed legislatively in 1977, so that one of the first things that survivors ask, I'm sure Louise, I know they ask us, is how much of my personal life is going to be dragged through the courtroom. I break things down in most fields to 2 kinds of cases. Cases in which the assailant is a stranger, and cases in which the assailant is an acquaintance. In a stranger rape, it is almost impossible for a defense attorney to ask the victim any questions about her prior sexual history.
That's the law.
Exactly. And there are specific exceptions carved out in that law. In acquaintance cases, it's still a much more difficult problem, because if there is a sexual history between the victim and her assailant, that will naturally become part of the reason perhaps that they were together, and it will be the subject for cross-examination. So the answer is different for different victims, but in the large category of cases where a woman has never seen her assailant before, I can say to her from the beginning of the process, no one is going to abuse you in the courtroom. The defense attorney will not be allowed to ask you any questions about your personal life, other than the limited period, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour, that the assault took place. And it's a wonderful change.
Louise, how do you help the victims during a trial stage or anything else?
I think the most important part of the process is helping people learn to trust. Because after this kind of victimization, a person's trust level just goes down to zero. Especially if they find in their personal lives with friends, family, that they find themselves getting blamed or in some way held responsible for what happened to them. And unfortunately, this still happens a lot. In terms of the criminal prosecution part of it, very often a rape survivor who is very angry, of course, about what's happened to her, will turn that anger to the court process itself, because in certain ways it's like a re-victimization. Again, control is taken away from you. You're a witness in the case. You don't have say over how it's conducted, although certainly we find that the unit is very, very good about taking the wishes and the concerns and the problems of the survivor into account as much as possible, but there still are legal matters that have to be attended to. You don't know when suddenly you'll be pulled from your job to go down and be called upon to tell the story to yet another person for yet another court proceeding.
And if you consider, most victims have never had any exposure to the criminal justice system, and this is a terrible way to begin it in the sense of learning everything all at once. So for us, having the resource of counselors who are dealing with the victims, so that Louise and her colleagues can call me and say, Linda, Mrs. Jones doesn't really understand why she has to come down again, or she wasn't aware that the Crime Victims Compensation Program will pay for her hospitalization. We have assistance to help explain to the victims what our process concerns.
Now, are there units similar to yours throughout New York City metropolitan area?
Yes, there are.
So
most of the other DA's offices modeled theirs on ours, and they're in every county of the city. There is some corresponding unit, and in many of the outlying areas in New Jersey and Long Island, there are also, and Westchester has a fine unit.
I'd like to get back to the legal end. What about corroboration on rape cases?
That, I think, is the reason there was a corroboration requirement for centuries. That is the reason I think most of the myths about the difficulty of these prosecutions exist today. The myths are based in the reality that for centuries the victim's word was not legally sufficient to take a rape case to trial. And that was the only crime in the penal law that had the requirement of corroborating the victim's word with independent evidence. Evidence of the identification of the assailant, evidence of the force that was used in the attack, and evidence of the sexual nature of the attack. All three of those elements had to be corroborated by some other kind of evidence, which was absurd and was not eliminated in this state till the early 70s. Victims still come to us and say, but all you have is my word against his. That's all you need in a robbery case or an assault case or any kind of one-witness identification case. And it's certainly legally sufficient in sexual assaults. So that's been a help to us, and we still need to inform people that that is the case. Corroboration still exists, unfortunately, with child victim cases, and that's something that many legislative groups are working on now.
We have to take a break now, but I'd like to discuss the date rape right after we come back. You're watching Lawline. Stay with us.
There's a reason people whisper when they tell you a rumor. It's because 9 times out of 10, it's not true. Take all the rumors about AIDS. People are saying you can catch AIDS from a mosquito bite or in swimming pools. The fact is, there isn't a single case of AIDS on record caused by casual contact. It's up to you. You can believe the rumors, or you can get the facts.
Rumors are spreading faster than AIDS. Call your local Red Cross for the facts.
Lawyers, like medical specialists, limit their practice to certain areas of the law. At our firm, Zalman & Schnorman, we specialize in personal injury litigation. We concentrate on helping injury victims receive fair compensation, and there is no charge for our legal services unless we are successful. If you are too injured to come to our office, we will come to see you. At Zalman & Schnorman, we care about you.
And now a word from the American Lung Association. Your lungs are an incredible piece of machinery, but your lungs are also incredibly delicate. Diseases of the lung are among the most frequent causes of suffering, disability, and death in the United States. Lung cancer is now the #1 cancer killer in America among both men and women. Chronic bronchitis and emphysema are marked by chronic obstruction to the airflow. Among chronic diseases, asthma is the leading cause of school absenteeism. Yes, TB is still with us. In the past year, over 22,000 Americans have contracted TB. Lung trouble can come from the air you breathe at work, but thanks to the American Lung Association, you can breathe a little easier. They're working to fight all this lung disease. Your lungs are a miracle. Take care of your lungs. They're only human. And if my lungs weren't in great shape, I couldn't have said all this. The American Lung Association. The Christmas seal people.
Hello, you're watching Lawline. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. Today's topic is prosecution of rape cases and sexual abuse. With us is Linda Fairstein and Louise Kinley. Linda, we were discussing before the break date rape cases. What's the status of those?
The status is difficult to describe. I think we should encourage viewers and unfortunately victims by starting with the fact that there's been tremendous improvement in these areas. More women are reporting victimization and we are trying more of these cases. They are still the cases. I think the downside is that public attitudes about these cases, the people who sit on our juries, still tend to blame victims. And I think Louise and I probably both see it with the people closest to victims, often the people who should be supportive without going to a counseling group, who instead of saying, this is a terrible thing that happened to you, say, well, why did you go to his apartment at that hour of the night? Or why did you not take a cab? Why did you have so much to drink? So it's still viewed often, unfortunately, as a victim-precipitated crime, and people blame the victim instead of the assailant.
Louise, in your experience, how many victims do not report the crimes to the police?
Well, you see, I really couldn't answer that because the people that I see, for the most part, have reported.
Okay.
Certainly not all of them. And as Linda said, it's usually the acquaintance and date rape cases that have the most difficult time deciding to report. Very often, this might be somebody that they've dated, and they feel that they have absolutely no case at all. And very often, they will have gone home and tried to forget about it, which is usually the advice they're given, and then break down a month or a couple of weeks or a month later, end up in our office, and of course at that time it is even more difficult to prosecute.
Linda, can you have rape between a married couple?
Now in the state, yes, you can. The law hasn't been changed, but the Court of Appeals threw out the, as unconstitutional in a case, the marital exception. So yes, and Louise and her unit see a lot of domestic violence, as do we in the courts, but more of it that goes forward in terms of prosecution, more of the interest is in the battering cases and more of the interest on behalf of the victims. Some of them report sexual assaults, but unfortunately many more of them live with the victimization of that kind of problem than take it to the courts.
Louise, what can you tell our viewers to reduce the risk of rape?
That's a very difficult question
I only
because
asked
in my
tough questions.
experience, of course, you can be careful about walking alone at night, you can be careful about locking your apartment door, but the women that I see are raped in all kinds of circumstances, and I hesitate to answer that question because it goes back to, therefore you weren't careful and therefore it is your fault. It's not. There is no way to be safe.
I agree with Louise 100%. I often describe it as a crime of vulnerability, of a moment of vulnerability in the victim's life and opportunity on the part of the assailant. And unfortunately, basic crime prevention tips, I mean, the obvious things of where you walk, at what hours you walk, or holding your keys in your hand, the things that police tell people all the time are basic rules, but it's not the victim who can prevent a rape, and it's often being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that wrong place may be your home, sound asleep when someone breaks in. So it's the rapist's responsibility, and we have not learned what makes people offend.
Linda, I know you were the prosecutor of the Robert Chambers matter.
Yes.
I know you're also involved in the Central Park jogger matter. What is the problems that the prosecution has in these high visibility cases?
No matter what the crime, in the high visibility kind of case, there are additional pressures put on you just doing your work because of the outside interest. Most of the prosecutors who are chosen for those cases are chosen because they as well have an ability and experience to shut out the external pressure. It just makes it a little more tedious to get the work done. But the nature of the cases is really no different than what we do on a daily basis. They, for some reason, often inexplicably, hold the public interest and attention.
Yes, but of course the jurors, many times before they even come into the courtroom, know little about the case from the media.
And that's, as you know, not the issue. The judge must explore with them whether they have formed such a fixed opinion that they can't keep an open mind and listen to the evidence. And we explore with them during deliberations. You understand that what you've read is in a local tabloid newspaper, and that may or may not be the truth or the evidence in the case. The only evidence that you can consider is from the witness stand. Now, if jurors come in, potential jurors say, I can't do that, I believe Joe Blow is guilty because I read it in the Post, then they can't serve on that case.
Let's see if you can give us some inside information on when you prosecute these type of cases. Do you look for certain types of jurors that you think will be more favorable to the prosecution, and are there certain types of jurors that you definitely want to exclude?
Well, I don't look for them to be favorable to the prosecution. I mean, ultimately that would be a nice end result, but you want people who are open-minded and intelligent, and I think, unfortunately, in these cases, people whose attitudes are a little less rigid and people who are not, by their views, going to express blame for the victim. Often it's not easy to discern during the voir dire process, but we want intelligent, open-minded people with a lot of common sense.
Okay. Louise, if someone wants to get in touch with your particular group, are you only limited to here in Manhattan, or do you go throughout the metropolitan New York area?
We don't have any catchment area, so anyone who has been a victim of a violent crime can call us.
Both men and women?
Men and women, absolutely.
And how would they get in touch with you?
The number is, it's St. Luke Roosevelt Hospital Center, and the number is 212-523-4728.
Can you give us an idea, when someone comes to you, what should they expect?
I think one thing that's very important for me to say on a show like this is that coming for counseling can make an enormous difference, and we would never pressure anyone to prosecute if they didn't want to. That is always their choice. We would explain to them their options and the reasons why it might be in their best interests to prosecute, but that's a decision that each person has to make depending on what's happening in their life at the moment. The kind of services that we offer really depend on the kinds of problems that the survivor has, from concrete services like helping them find a new apartment, get into the welfare system, get medical attention that they might not have had, to dealing with the really serious traumatic impact that rape has in terms of depression, difficulties on the job, difficulty in your relationships and within your family, with your husband, with your boyfriend. One of the most devastating impacts of rape is, as I said before, lack of trust, and that really goes across the board to everybody involved in that person's life.
Louise, do you also work with the family members?
Yes, we see what we call co-survivors, and we use the word survivor because we feel that these people truly have survived a life-threatening situation. I've never spoken to any woman who was raped who didn't believe that her life was in danger.
Linda, and what can a victim expect when they come to you, to your office? What happens?
Well, I think they can expect better than what every made-for-TV movie leads people who have been survivors of these crimes to expect. There have been a lot of changes. We have our most senior assistants working on these cases, and you work with one lawyer from the beginning of the case through the disposition. We make available to them, if someone has come to us and has not had counseling or a medical referral, we'll pick up the phone and call Louise's unit because they do such extraordinary work. And survivors who come in and said they've not reported or delayed reporting because they thought they could deal with it themselves, it's bigger than anybody thinks that it's going to be in their lives, and it can't be dealt with, I think, without professional help at some level. So we really encourage counseling. And then we try and expeditiously move the case, explain away as many unfounded fears as the survivor has about the criminal justice process, make her comfortable getting through it, and if the defendant is guilty of the charge, we try and convict him and see that he is sentenced to the maximum sentence that the law allows.
What about confidentiality? Now, I know the name of the Central Park jogger has not been made public. Is that for all victims of sexual abuse?
In this state, there's been sort of a gentleman's agreement with the press. It's not legislation, but the press does not print the names of survivors of sexual assaults. The exceptions are victims who have chosen to make public statements themselves, as some have done, and I applaud all those who do. It's not, I mean, the stigma traditionally has been on the victim that she has done something wrong and therefore need be private. And I think it has taken a lot of courage, and a lot of survivors now want to speak out and say they've been victims and they did nothing wrong or nothing that caused the victimization. And a lot of women, when they go forward with civil suits, third-party suits or whatever, become public.
Okay, we have to take a break now. You're watching Lawline. Stay with us.
Taught me to steal and to pitch. Today I struck out 7 and stole home. I think Dad would have been proud. Coach was. He said he wished Dad had taken as good care of himself as he did of me and Billy. Billy won't talk about it, and Mom can't stop crying. I don't know what it's like to have a heart attack. except I can see it hurts. It hurts bad.
You can help prevent heart disease. We can tell you how.
If you are injured in an automobile or any type of accident, you may have the right to fair compensation for injuries, pain, and suffering, including loss of wages. So if an accident leaves you disabled or unable to return to your job, put our law firm, Zalman and Schnorman, to work for you. There is no charge for our legal services unless your case is settled or won. Call Zalman and Schnorman, who are specialists in personal injury litigation.
My father, Gordon McCrae, was one of the biggest stars in musicals. He was also an alcoholic. When I was little, I thought I could stop my dad from drinking. But only the alcoholic can do that. And finally, my father got help and stayed sober the last 7 years of his life. I was so proud of him. Alcoholism is treatable and preventable. Be alert to signs that you might need help, especially if you're the child of an alcoholic. For information, call the National Council on Alcoholism, 1-800-NCA-CALL.
Hello, you're watching Lowline. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. Today's topic is the prosecution of rape cases and what a rape victim can do if this happens to you or any member of your family or friends. With us is Linda Fairstein. Linda is with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and Louise Kinley. Louise is with Roosevelt St. Luke's Hospital, a special unit dealing with this subject. Linda, you basically told us what happens as far as the victim is concerned, but how many of these cases actually reach trial or are plea bargained?
There are several hundred of these cases throughout the city that go to trial every year, and hundreds more in which there's some kind of plea bargain. And by plea bargain, I don't by any means want to put a negative emphasis on it. It's sometimes a very good thing in this process. For example, in many of the identification cases, many of the cases with stranger rapes are patterns. We see frequently an assailant, because it's the most recidivist crime, the offenders repeat more often than any other kind of crime, we'll see an individual who will be called the Midtown Rapist or the Penta Hotel Rapist, who will attack 5, 8, 10 women until he's caught with a modus operandi that is identical in every case. And when someone like that is caught, and we may have fingerprints in the apartment, there may be 8 lineup identifications. Some of those cases plead guilty to the charge. We're not plea bargaining to misdemeanors, to lesser offenses. And so we get an astounding number of pleas to the charge in which we get very close to the maximum sentences.
Linda, these men who commit rapes on a continuous basis, do they fall in any type of categories?
Alan, they cover the board. I'm sure Louise hears the same thing. It is just another astounding figure. I used to be asked constantly, what is the profile of a rapist? I mean, there is no single profile. It is so varied. We have assailants of every age, every ethnic background. We have prosecuted an astounding number of professional men who are dentists, doctors,
yes, I remember reading
lawyers.
about that.
And you know, there is no category. There is no single profile of a rapist. There are just a wide range of individuals.
Louise, do you get involved in sexual abuse of children?
Yes, we do. Very often we'll refer those cases to a child unit, but we will see them at least for an assessment process and to figure out where to send them for referral. And if the child is 12 or so, then we might see that child for individual therapy as well.
And what special problems do the children have with your unit?
We've set up an entire subunit that deals specifically with child victims and domestic offenses. The children have a lot of difficulties. One, there's still a corroboration requirement for many child victim cases, and more importantly, the whole system, our whole criminal justice system, is designed for adult victims, and we expect the same standards of a child to be on a witness stand, to be cross-examined about the events. There's an entire new field of psychology that involves validation of child testimony, because a defense attorney can have a field day cross-examining a child about the date and time and place of an occurrence of a crime. And it may be a 6-year-old child who can't yet tell time or doesn't know January different from July the way an adult would, or keep a date book or a diary. So obviously there are just problems that are innate to the system, and we're trying to be innovative and legislatively change them, and creatively, in our
Linda,
world.
what do you say to a parent who doesn't want to subject their child to another abuse?
Mm-hmm.
They've had one abuse to another abuse, and I say that's the court system, putting a 6-year-old or a child or 7-year-old on the stand subject to cross-examination.
We say several things. Remarkably, and I don't know if Louise has seen this, the children do much better than the adults. The children are much more resilient. If they have been believed by someone, police officer, counselor, DA, the children respond fabulously well and recover. The parents often have, and some unreasonably, but terrible guilt. I'm the one that left him with that babysitter. I'm the one that let this go on for months by letting her sleep at her cousin's house. So the first thing is trying to explain to them what the system is and working with counselors to tell them how the children will get through it. Secondly, it's my view not to subject a child or a family to the process if there's not a reasonably good likelihood of conviction. We can't obviously in any case promise the outcome because a jury will decide it. But if we think there is no chance that a jury is going to convict or very little likelihood, I will tell the parent that up front so that they can make the choice whether or not to participate. If, on the other hand, there is an overwhelming case with an eyewitness or physical evidence that we don't normally have, many cases with child victims include, unfortunately, physical injury that corroborates the nature of the offense. And if I feel that there is a strong likelihood of success in the court, I will certainly encourage the parent to go forward with the case.
Well, what about, does the child actually have to take the stand in the courtroom with the jury on one side and the prosecutor on the other and the district attorney and the defense counsel? Or can they do it in the judge's chambers? Or
No, most of it, in the overwhelming number of cases, most of it goes on in a courtroom. And again, the children, if you've taken them into an empty courtroom, if you've made them comfortable there, they don't mind, for the most part, being listened to and observed. The other thing is it's a wonderful area for this constructive use of plea bargaining, of going forward with a case, and if there seems to be a reasonable plea, not to the top charge that will exact some kind of justice and not subject a child who has been emotionally traumatized to the court process, we'll go for that.
Louise, in the moment we have left, what would you like to tell the public?
All I would really like to say is that if this has happened to anybody, no matter how long ago, there is help available, and it can really help. It can really make a difference in a person's life just to have some place to come and talk about it and work through some of those.
That's a good point. Linda, if something happened a year or 2 years ago, can a woman still come to the district attorney's office?
Absolutely. My first recommendation is, Louise, is get help from somewhere, and I think counseling is the best place to start. We're available to answer the question, to tell her whether or not the criminal case is still viable, what the statute of limitation is, but don't deal with it yourself. There are people to help you.
Linda Fairstein from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, thank you. And Louise Kindley, thank you very much for appearing on Lawline. And as always, this is Alan Schnorman, and thank you for watching Lawline.
You have been watching Lawline with your host, New York trial attorney, author and lecturer, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions or comments about this week's program, please write to Lawline, 27th floor, 63 Wall Street, New York, New York, 10005.